Hey everybody, I'm back. It's I, John Harper, back on YouTube after I don't even know how long. Uh, um, I am the designer of Blades in the Dark and other role-playing games, which Blades is the relevant thing for what we're doing tonight. I'm joined here by Andrew Gillis. Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Andrew. I never left YouTube, and I'm a sometimes game designer. I'm working on a hack of Blades in the Dark called Girl by Moonlight, uh, and I guess that's why I'm here,
Yeah,
talking about Blades.
that is right. We are talking about Blades. There are several hacks in the works right now. We're within the first year or so after publication of Blades, and a bunch of people are hacking the game and heading towards their own publication status for their hacks. And I thought it would be a good time to revisit some of the history of the game and some of the design process. A very cool and clever person on Twitter named Sidney Icarus is doing some videos, some YouTube videos about their design process. And one of the videos, which I'll link to in the description here, specifically calls out this idea of not always getting to see designers' failed states or dead ends or design paths that didn't pan out. And when I was watching the video, I thought, oh well, not me though, because I designed Blades in public to a large extent, from the Kickstarter to now, or to publication. But then Sydney specifically mentioned me, like, oh, I wish I had seen some of John's dead ends, and I was like, oh right, yeah, there was a whole thing before the public phase, before the Kickstarter, a long process of many dead ends, and I'm gonna keep saying dead end tonight because it's like an easy phrase, but I don't think of them as dead ends personally. I think of them more as like designs that were not right for this game, but in some cases are right for other games, which we'll get into for this in particular. But dead end is just a nice, convenient phrase, but I don't really think of them that way as like a true dead end or wasted effort per se. I don't know. What do you think about that, Andrew? Do you feel like the dead endedness of things, or are you?
I personally feel like, I mean, at least in my design process, it's been a matter of like spilling out into design space and then like bumping into walls or
Mm-hmm.
deciding that I need to cut things. And so like there's nothing wrong with having those bits of your game that need to be hacked away. Like it's just a natural part of feeling out what the space you want to be in is.
Yeah.
And you don't get to know that shape from the get-go, or at least I can't imagine most people do. There's that process of feeling around in the dark and figuring out what it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a common way to work and can be a fruitful way to work.
Yeah, and like don't be afraid to pursue these things
Mm-hmm.
just because they might end up being dead ends. Like at least you can confirm, at the very worst, and at best you find a new facet to whatever you're working on. You solve some problem.
Yeah. Exactly. Uh, yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about Blades in particular and how it evolved over the time of design before it became more public and more accessible in its public phase of design. So I'm going to switch us over to our shared screen here.
Back when this game was only a twinkle in John Harper's eye.
That's right. This file is from 2013. I'm pretty sure. I don't know exactly when it was first created. I didn't go back and like double check that, but yeah, roughly 2013. This is, as I recall, basically the first thing that I made for Blades. Of course, in design, because that's how I do things sometimes. There is probably a page in a notebook that I don't have anymore, but this was kind of the initial thing that came out, and it's definitely inspired by Thief by the Thief video game. And at the time, Will Hindmarch was working on Project Dark, and Matt Snyder had a little like beta thing that he was messing with, which was like an OSR-ish kind of thiefy game, but a little more in the vein of the classic RPG style. So I think in the run up to the new Thief being released, everyone in our little circle got very excited about it, and we had it on the brain. So I wanted to run something in that vein. And this was the first thing that came out, which is initially it was definitely heading in the like format of one of my like one pager or something in that style. There's sort of 3 columns here. On the left column it says thieves, and the right column it says guild. You're a thieves guild. And the idea of the design was going to be that the left column, the thieves column, had everything about the thieves and what type of thieves you could play. And then the right column had the guild info in it. So even at this very first blush, I was thinking about like the guild should have, kind of like stuff.
Yeah, I'm already seeing the character playbook, crew book idea starting to maybe form.
Yeah, it's sort of forming here. And very tellingly, there is nothing on the guild side.
It's like, what would this be?
What if you had that? I don't know what it would be. And then the system here, which I think maybe is clear on the next page, or the next sheet, or next file, I should say. This is just a single page, but you choose your sort of thief type, burglar, cutthroat. Leech is already here. Scoundrel and thug, and then you have that first number there is your blades number, and the second is your dark number.
Ooh.
And you roll, and like, when you do a bladesy thing, you roll under your blades number. When you do a dark thing, you roll under your dark number. And sort of 316-ish with fighting and non-fighting, or troll babe, or that kind of style.
A very minimal scaffold.
Yeah.
To get through things.
Right. And that was the idea. Was I was definitely influenced by Matt Snyder's sort of OSR-ish thinking here, and thinking that the guild would be a thing and the characters would be really simplistic and they would come and go. They would get thrown in prison or they'd die or whatever. And you wanted this sort of simplistic character.
To keep attachment to them low.
Right. That was the first blush thought anyway. And that's probably the main kind of dead end thing here is thinking that characters for this type of thing, which became, and even at this point, I was thinking it was going to be pretty sandboxy.
So
those characters are way too simplistic, right? For that.
And I have a question here.
Yeah.
Which is, had you play tested this yet? Or like
this,
played something like this yet? How did this start being a thing?
That's a good question. I know that this sheet here, and I think the next file, were never played. Kind of, you'll see. But I had just finished a year plus long Stars Without Number campaign. And that definitely led very strongly into this, because one of the main issues, one of the big positives of that series was the sandboxiness of it was extremely good. And I'd run sandbox games before. I had a great Warhammer sandbox campaign too, but they always felt like we're just kind of getting by with this. Like we're spinning the plates real well and it's just kind of working out. Stars Without Number definitely gave us a little more tools to use to make that work better. But the constant ongoing refrain of that whole campaign was, what are we trying to do? What is our crew on this spaceship about? Are we pirates? Are we merchants?
What is our purpose?
Explorers? And it was fun to play to find out what that was initially, but then it kept being a question like for the whole campaign, and it never got like really annoying, but it was this ongoing joke in our game, like what are we again? Are we space pirates? So I think that was a big push here to have that column on the right. Like I know I need to address that. I don't know how at this point.
And I know that your other big bugbear from talking to you was the whole like making plans thing. And I don't see anything in this version of Blades. Like we haven't tackled that bugbear yet.
Nope, not on my mind at all.
This was just, again, like clarity of purpose
Yep.
and having a nice, simple, disposable character to then fit into really like the group is playing the guild.
Yeah. Yeah. Have a simplistic game system, simplistic characters, some kind of unifying element for the guild side of things, and then let it be another one sheet game, or like or like Lady Blackbird, like a small game that you would play for a couple sessions or 3 sessions or something.
Yeah, and so at this point too, the guild isn't mechanized in the way the crew becomes later to participate in the sandbox in a way that is supported mechanically. This is just like the fiction provides a sandbox.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it that way yet. It was very much going to, like, obviously there's nothing here, but it was, I was thinking more along the lines of answering questions to create your guild, you know, leading question style, apocalypse world-y.
Yeah, and I mean, like, no games had this yet. There's nothing to model it after.
It was somewhat rare. Like Apocalypse World had the Choppers Gang and the Hard Hold.
Which
Poisoned has the,
but
yeah. Poisoned had like creating your crew and creating your ship.
Yeah, I think that's probably Poisoned is probably the most clear one that I can think of.
Yeah, it was the one we played the most, and I mean, there was a time when Blades was almost a kind of Poisoned hack in a way, which I think still would have been a pretty cool game. But Rain is another game we played that had a guild or a crew or I forget what they're called in Rain. It's like your faction basically. So yeah, we've been exposed to it, but I was definitely thinking this was going to be more of an organizing principle to do a job or two. Like, this is the type of jobs we do. You would do them, and then maybe if you wanted to keep playing, you could. But
you were you were outside of the designed space at that point.
Yeah. And this next page here it's basically the same thing, just a little more developed. I think I looked at the timestamp on this, and this is the next day.
Right, so you sleep on it, you come back to it.
Yeah.
And there's this different design.
The guild has started to happen. There's an idea of being connected and having a reputation. There's starting situations about you're working for the unseen.
The leech is dead.
The leech is kind of gone. So burglar, cutthroat, scoundrel, and thug are still here. Still Blade's number and dark number. The dice system right in the middle here is lasers and feelings. So that's what I was saying earlier about like dead ends not really being dead ends. Like, I came up with this and it wasn't right for this. And then when I was messing with lasers and feelings that day, I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah.
And it just basically copied and pasted it.
Yeah.
But what's also really funny, this is like 2 days into the development of Blades. And if you look at this middle column, it says Blades in the Dark, action and consequences, effects and risks. Which is like, it's basically the game.
Yep. On a very broad, like high level, the principles of the game are there.
Yeah.
And I mean, that says something, right? That says that these are what your goals were. Or this is what your like aesthetic that you were pursuing was. And so it's good to see that, like you were able to keep chasing that and get to it.
Yeah. And I think you'll see this in your designs all the time, where you either have these kind of goalposts that are very strong in your mind. I know it's about action and consequences. I know the effects and risks are a thing. I know the thieves matter and the guild matters. And then what is supporting those goalposts changes and changes and changes and grinds and grinds and grinds, because the thing you're aiming for is so clear, and you're like, yes, that is definitely what I want. Or you can be in the other place where you have all these tools that you think are really powerful. Oh, I have such a cool system for that. I have such a cool system for that. But you don't have your goalpost well delineated.
One way I've heard it articulated that I really like is when talking to Ash. She often refers to this thing about like mechanics producing aesthetics. So in that framework, right, you're coming in being like, I have this aesthetic that I want to design mechanics to support. And if you're designing mechanics, you need to feel like, what aesthetic do these mechanics make?
Yep.
So in each case, you're designing from one end of the problem to the other.
Yeah.
And trying to answer those different questions.
Yeah, and a lot of that work will be recycled or ground down or ground away or whatever. But in a sense, that is the stuff that you throw away is making your game better. It's hard to feel that, right, at the time when you're like, oh, this is totally not working. I wasted all this time on this. But when you recognize that and you set it aside, you've just made your game better.
Yeah, you've made your voice clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Piece of design.
Yeah. This has graduated to multiple pages now.
It's bloat, design bloat.
I know. Three. Oh, 3 pages.
Oh.
I'm getting clever now, and I divided game and master into 2 columns. So this is the game master page, and the left has like game things, wealth and loot, gear, etc. And the master side has the like how to run the game text.
And we have progress clocks.
Progress clocks have appeared.
Either way in. I noticed there was one on the other sheet as well, like the first sheet in this set.
There's a little placeholder design for one there.
And so those were queued off of Apocalypse World. Like
Yes.
they're an MC only tool in Apocalypse World, basically. Was that just like a straight pull? You were just like, yeah, these are good. I'm taking them to my game.
Yeah, 100%. And I had already used them as a player facing thing a little bit, just to do like in Stars Without Number, and in.
And actually, speaking of Poisoned, of does this too, where they have like bad things that are happening that are on index cards or whatever, and so there's
it has impending
some
dooms.
of the framework for this. Yeah, it's already laid out.
Yeah, and Poisoned's version is really cool. You put out the doom and you roll a die, and then you write down the number that you rolled on the card, and then whenever the GM feels it's appropriate for the doom to get closer, potentially. You roll the die, and if you roll a different number, you write it on the card. And if you roll a number that's already on the card, if you ever get a match, then the doom manifests. So it has this nice little like, I don't know how many segments the clock is. It's like
it's very elastic.
It works really well for Poisoned.
Like mechanics that have that kind of elasticity can be really are perfect for that kind of thing, of there being this one big bad thing with a little bit of uncertainty on it. Really messes with your players. It's a good one. Yeah,
it can be very motivating. Yeah. The game master jobs are nothing super interesting there. There is this target profile down here, which is kind of another dead end, where there's like 6 categories of things that a target might have: wealth, alertness, barriers, dangers, connections, and follow-up. And this was in the GM facing stuff for a while. This got into playtest in another form, or maybe it's kind of like this. And for quite a while, there was this kind of target like stat sheet sort of, as a way to help the GM come up with stuff. But over time, it became clear that this was it fell into this weird gutter between fiction first and not. Where it is kind of fiction first, right? You're thinking about like, how alert are the guards? What kind of barriers do they have in the fiction? But when it's presented this way, it's easy to just kind of go, okay, wealth is a 3, alertness is 1, barriers 4, and have this kind of numerical profile as your shorthand, and then that shorthand over time, surely enough, like dominates the mental space, and that
because it's so quick and easy to just plop some numbers in, you end up skipping the bit where you're supposed to think about the fiction.
And then you get into that space where you've decided that their connections are 4 out of 6 or whatever, because you're like, they're really well connected, and then later you need to bring it into the fiction, and you're like, they're supposed to be really connected. I need to invent something now.
And there's like a sense of obligation to this number that you've written down kind of arbitrarily,
instead of the other way around, right? You think of their connections and you go, oh, they're very well connected. So it ended up surviving into the like district profiles where it has like wealth
Yeah,
and
this is
criminal
reminding
influence.
me of some of the like tier stuff, and yeah, like you're saying, the
All of this got collapsed
neighborhood.
into tier,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, totally. Which is doing a lot of this work, but in a way that, yeah,
It does it in
like
a
you're talking
way,
about, doesn't
it
make
forces you
it
to say,
numerical.
yeah, it forces you to say the fictional thing. When it's just
Yeah.
tier, like, you have to fill in the blanks.
The thing you are justifying is sufficiently high level that there is no pigeonholing of it.
Right.
Is kind of, yeah, how it feels.
Yeah.
I like that here under master you list. First of all, you're not the master of the game. The term game master is an artifact of history. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very nice little statement.
I like that. Maybe that should have gone to the game. That's your real roles are world builder and referee. That's not terrible.
That's a pretty sensible explanation of like, yeah, what are you here to do?
Yeah. You don't decide what happens to the player's characters. You establish the effects and risks of a situation. Then the dice roll determines what happens.
Yeah, and that's a really important way of framing. Like this is a very helpful way to frame things to someone and be like, yo, your job isn't to uh, decide their fate. It's to just be the oracle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're the fortune teller with the tarot cards or whatever else.
Yep.
They're
Ooh.
feeding you stuff, and then you need to interpret it.
Yeah.
So,
Then the third page. This is the Leech and the Whisper are hiding back here.
oh, secret magic people.
Secret magic
Here now we
people.
have the whisper because initially the leech was both magic and
Yep.
whatever else.
Yep. And here is, we're going to see this a few more times. Here is a dead end that lasted for quite a while in the game. If we go back to the front, burglar, cutthroat, scoundrel, and thug, all of their stuff sums to 7.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Leech and the Whisper sum to 6 because they have special magic powers and they have to be balanced
Yeah.
against the other character types. So they don't get to have as high a number as everyone else because they can do funny magical things, and that means they have to be checked in somehow.
I much prefer the final version, which we can get around to.
Yeah.
The discussion that we had around that, I thought it was just like, I just could not nod harder.
Yeah, it is not necessarily an absolute thing for all games everywhere, but breaking out of that mold for me in this process of the game, getting out of this particular cul-de-sac, which it persists for quite a while.
It's a big one.
It is a big one.
But there are a bunch of things that underpin it working, which I think it's really important to talk about. When maybe we'll get around to it. But yeah.
Oh, we'll go ahead. I mean, we're here. So.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason, I mean, this is where we get ranty, John. This is the rant begins. Mark your watches. So the reason that you can get away with having all of those kind of weird fictional consequence trappings to this immense power that they get mechanically is that the game doesn't permit them to shy away from those fictional consequences, right? Like just how like murder matters and all those decisions that you made in your world building and like framing of the fiction make it so that can be consequential in a way that it wouldn't necessarily be in a game where they're just wandering adventurers.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it's clearly better you just like blow up everything or summon a bunch of demons and then you leave and it's fine and those demons don't follow you, or you make so many problems that the GM can't enact all, like, right, you have so many bad consequences chasing you that there just isn't enough screen time for all of them to catch up with you.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a thing I see happen a lot in a lot of other games.
Yep.
But Blades is so small in its scope and your characters are so entrenched in their locations and their relationships that they just can't hide from Satara or whatever, you know, right? Like
there's kind of nowhere to go.
Yeah, it's going to come and get you.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel a lot more real and urgent, which is so important for keeping people honest on both sides. Both the MC or GM or whatever and the players themselves are really pushed to remain honest.
Yeah. And that particular, I did not have that particular insight up to and during that change. It was more through playtesting that was happening, that they were checked by the setting and by the other decisions I'd made. And so subconsciously, you know, I was like, well, we don't need that. But it took a long time to like sort of process why it was okay or not okay, but like good to let that go.
Yeah, and just like slowly turning it up version by version, and keeping an eye on those emergent aspects of your
Yeah.
game, right? Like you have to playtest to feel them out and experience them
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
appreciate all the outcomes.
So this one did not get played.
Yep.
This got put away. I think between this and the next version, that was the week when Lasers and Feelings was made, I think. So I just stole that system.
And actually, I've got one more question for you here,
Yeah.
which is we see here the mysticism, magic, etc. of the game starting to get a bunch of shape
Mm.
in that switch of like it isn't just the leech, it's now two different things. Oh, also we have demons and visions and all that other stuff, which is like alchemy comes into the game, demons and visions. Were you starting to form an idea around the like early industrial Victorian setting at this point, or was that still?
Yeah, that was definitely. I mean, that's the Thief 2, Thief 1 and Thief 2. Definitely have this like mechanized fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fully on my mind. Dishonored was just out, or
Yeah,
I
and it super
somewhere in there by the Thief people,
yeah.
carrying on that thing. It kind of takes it into a little bit more like advanced timeline, but yeah, I was always thinking of that in the back of my head, and Lankmar and all that other kind of stuff. But the idea of using ghost lines already existed, or was happened right at this time, and using the ghost line setting for this hadn't really clicked yet. So there wasn't the world of darkness, the dark world. And all that. That ghosts aren't really a thing here yet. The Whisperer is supposed to be this sort of demon summoner, and the Leech is the alchemist. And
Cool.
that goes into the first bit of playtesting a little bit too, I think.
Right, because a lot of very important information about the setting came about from play,
Yeah,
if I
yeah.
recall correctly.
The first playtest series defined a lot of that.
I mean, that's a tool I'm using for all of my, because I'm doing pre-gen content now for my game, and it's just like I've playtested each kind of scenario once, and so I'm just being like, cool, that's what the default thing is my playtest. Go have fun.
Yeah, I did the same. It I think it's really strong, right? Because
Yeah,
it feels genuine because it really did come from play.
and four people are probably going to be more interesting than just one
Yep.
in terms of like some product of their conversation will be cool and compelling.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
Oh shit, we're in PDFs now.
Yeah.
It's getting
Those were not made into PDFs because I never used them. I never printed them. I didn't need them on my phone or anything. So this goes into a format thing where it's a booklet. So there's like a cover and a back cover here. And then what follows is the sort of interior fold.
I see that it is much easier to succeed in this version of the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. That's an important cul-de-sac of the design here. The like take your highest number thing is part of it. Although in this case you only ever roll one die. There was a system for quite a while. This is what I playtested at BurningCon that year. The die, you only ever rolled one die, and then you got these outcomes of one was bad, 5 or a 6 was good, and then everything else was the mixed result. The fictional positioning determined what a 1 meant for you and what a 5 or 6 meant for you. So if you were in a controlled position, so to speak, your 1s would be those soft failures where you could try again. And when you're desperate, they're like, you die, kind of, it had that idea of advantages and risks.
Yeah, we're starting to get position and effect, the kernel of it forming. I love this bit. When you do something risky, the GM hands you a D6, repeats your action back to you, and asks what effect you hope to achieve. It's like, yo, you're really going to do this? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
I noticed myself doing that in like all my GMing someone would say what they're doing, and I would tend to say it back to them as a like checking in, like,
Yeah, it's like an active listening thing.
yeah.
Like,
So
am I hearing you correctly?
it sounds like you want to sneak up on both of them and slit both their throats before they can, and they go, oh well, when you put it like that.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, so the idea was to like effectively have the position talk by repeating that and then getting them to confirm. But yeah, the dice thing, it is an interesting little dead end here, because the way I was thinking about the heroes, well, the characters, the scoundrels, the heroes, they're more heroic here. They're like,
yeah, they're getting their way a lot.
Only on a 1 do things really go bad.
And there's the biggest space is now the muddy, like 7 to 9 style result where risk manifests, and in fact, this is do something under fire. It's the risk manifest. Choose 1. You abandon your action and diminish the risk, or you achieve the reduced effect and risk manifest fully.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is very much that hard bargain, ugly choice.
Yep.
Space.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought of them yet as the types of characters that they really need to land that 6. Like that's the space where they're living. Is that, come on, if it's not a 6, I know something's gonna go awry. It took a while to see that.
And so I remember talking to you at one point, and you talking about being more interested in a lot of cases in people like succeeding cleanly, or like as interested, because a lot of folks will claim that, oh yeah, like the 7 to 9 is the best result, which I feel like any statement in that way of just like, well, this is the best thing, is generally wrong. But I see here now that this one has like more of that space, and that you cut away some of that space.
Yeah.
You talk a little bit about that?
Part of it has to do with the dice pools like skewing the outcome, the probabilities.
Yeah, once we move to rolling multiple d6s and taking the best result, we skew towards
sort
better
of
numbers.
Pushes you up. So that's definitely part of it. I think, glancing at this, I'm not really sure statistics wise how much it changes it, but I at this point I distinctly remember having already had many arguments on the internet with people who insisted that 7 to 9 is the good result and everything else is boring. So I was definitely mindful of that and not on that team. And
yeah, this is kind of your way of taking part in that conversation.
Kind of.
Just being like, yeah, here's a game.
Yeah, but it hasn't manifested fully yet, because it, like you were saying, like this, just on paper, even like the 7 to 9 is bigger. It's a bigger space.
It's the most common result. Yeah.
Which is, having it be the most common is good, I think. But having that poor 1 down there by itself,
it looks a little lonely, John.
It's strange. Looking back on it, it's strange that I ever thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, because it really changes the feeling of tension in the game, and the feeling of the like efficacy of the characters in a really good way.
I think part of it too, and I think this came up in the playtest at BurningCon. I was thinking of things a little bit backwards from the way it is now, where things tended to be more desperate, and there was a kind of dodging the 1 as opposed to hoping for the 6. I think that's kind of where I was in my head. Like, yeah, okay, you're cool, you can do this, but like you'll die. Like
every now and then something truly catastrophic will happen.
You'll be possessed. There's no resistance roll, You'll be possessed. He'll cut off your hand, and like you're dodging that 1 and being like, whew, okay, I didn't.
And so these are still in that OSR, you're going to roll up like 2 or 3 characters kind of spirit. Just like these are still very disposable protagonists in a way.
That's the way I was thinking about it. But now when we look at the inside, this is one character. They're getting more complicated. They're a whole sheet. They're not a word and a number.
Yeah, now I'm investing more time and energy in making my character, and I'm going to be more pissed off when they randomly die.
Yes. And that friction has started. That friction carries through a lot of the early design here.
Because, I think it's very important that you're like, resistance hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, the resistance is really important.
Fundamental thing to what makes Blades work.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It takes a long time to show up, shockingly. But so now we're into sort of a Lady Blackbirdish looking thing where you have these larger categories, thief, and then each word under the thing is a talent that, you know, the more of those you have, the more thiefy you are. So athletics, awareness, pickpocket, and stealth.
Right. And do I fill that clock when I get more? So if I'm at 1, I have 1 segment, and then I can have like thief 2.
These are XP trackers.
Okay.
So
okay.
you and you will notice they are 4 sections, but not the Leech and the Whisper because they're special.
Because they're special, it takes more.
It takes 6 to level up your those because those are the magical, powerful
50%
things.
more.
Yes. Yeah, and typically, like I think it says here, progress. At the end of each session or when you have downtime, a week of fictional time passes is what downtime is. You fill 1 segment on one of your clocks. So it's a very slow
John, that
process.
Is horseshit.
It's super slow and horrible.
And you're running a gauntlet with like 1 can be your character just dead.
Yeah.
All right, great. I see some problems.
When you fill all the segments, clear the marks, and circle a new skill for that character type. When you circled all the skills for a given type, you are considered a master of those skills.
Oh.
Harm is kind of the same. Wealth, you have these wealth levels: poor, modest, adequate.
Right, and so with harm, we're kind of getting a little bit of trauma.
A little bit.
Or something, or like the harm levels. There's this kind of beginning of that design.
It's similar. It's kind of like healing in reverse. Like in this one, you fill the clock, and then when it's full, you take a harm status. Yeah.
And obviously, dead is the worst one.
Yes. And then wealth, this is a thing from the very beginning. I knew this is the first one we played, really. I knew that this game had to have abstracted wealth because it was going to be, originally it was just thieves. Like you're a thieves, you steal stuff. That was the...
Yes, you wanted to get valuables.
Yeah, and I played enough Burning Wheel to kind of really like that abstract resources system. And I'd played enough Stars Without Number and D&D to be kind of tired of counting my pennies. Although Stars has a cool like credit system you can use, but we weren't using it. And this is just like the easiest patch job, paste in abstract wealth system. Like, I don't know, it'll have words like the other stuff. I know it needs to be abstract. I don't want to fuck with it. And this just never worked. It was always really disappointing to play a group of thieves and be like, hey guys, I've just gone from modest to adequate. I'm so glad I murdered all those guys for their money.
Yeah, it was totally worth it.
Woo. I'm really feeling
I'm almost comfortable. Almost.
Vice is here.
Yep, Vice makes its appearance.
It's a thing you got to deal with. Here's the thieves like guild sheet where you're tracking who's in the guild and your territory and income. Oh, bribes and expenses. This was a whole thing. This lasted a long time. Like tracking your like who's in your pocket and who you owe debts to.
Yep.
That I thought that mattered, and that was a big part of the game for a long time.
And it used to be you would funnel a lot of your resources into that, basically. Like
yeah,
getting a cut every time you were making money.
We're gonna see that. I think it's in this next version. I'll go ahead and move on. So basically the same game system. We're starting to see. Ooh, Spider has shown up as a concept. This is all the same sort of concepts, but just laid out differently. Where is it?
Oh, hello.
Yeah, so yeah, stuff's happening. Hang on. Thieves Guild, territory, projects, like long-term projects are here. Actions and consequences. Establishing position has shown up. So here's a fun thing. I noticed this when I was going through. This is a type of dead end design that you'll see in a lot of my like folders and like attempts and things. Instead of writing a system, I will just write an essay about that thing and be like, this is a thing that you should do in the game. This should happen.
Yeah. And there's no actual structure. It's
figure that out, but it should be like that.
This matters a lot, but I don't know. How does it work?
Yeah. This lasted for a while. Somewhere along in here, this one or the next one, I started a private G+ group. There was a lot of people that started playtesting it. And God bless them. They, for a long time, they had to be like, so I'm trying to do that position thing that your essay talks about. And it seems like a good idea, but can we have like a system for that? Because it's just like this thing. So it was almost like notes to myself, just presented as,
as if this was a thing that you could use.
Figure it out, make it work.
I have left the blueprints to a wrench, and I expect you to assemble this machine for me.
Oh man, yeah. So the random tables started to come in, which survived into the final game. But you'd roll up your target and how many loot parcels their wealth was worth.
Yes, loot parcels.
Yeah. Fortunes and troubles are become entanglements later. That's just a way of like having weird stuff happen to the crew. This next version is again kind of the same thing.
The color red appears.
Red has appeared.
Amazing.
This system, we played this for like a few weeks. You used to have a dark die and a light colored die. The blade die was the lighter one, and the dark die was the dark colored one. And you would choose the one to roll, like to reflect what your character's doing. Like, I'm going to roll the dark die because I'm like,
you're being bold or risky,
being sneaky, and
if you're cautious and careful. Okay.
Then the outcomes were sort of like the different possibilities were tuned a little bit to whether you were being bold or cautious.
And this is a beginning of you trying to talk about like the idea of like desperate position. And we're starting to see some of this control. Totally a different way of framing this same conversation.
The GM determines the strength of your position on the fudge scale: terrible, poor, fair, good, or great.
If your position is negative, whatever that means, your risk is greater than your reward.
Yeah, if you're what it meant was if your position is terrible or poor, you're risking more than you'll get. If your position is good or great, you're risking less than what you might earn. And this persists for quite a long time. This idea that there's like parity in your risk and your effect, and then disparity, up or down.
Because you've like broken elements that exist in each of position and effect are paired together with like. And then it's like you're parsing this whole conversation differently in this initial version. Yeah,
I knew I needed something, but this just was this weird dead end. And we played a lot of these. I had a very game group of players. We played every week. Some of our like playtest notes stayed on my office's whiteboard for like several years. No one erased them, so we had this like corner of one of the whiteboards where we were like keeping all these notes. Here's same thing. Sheets looking pretty much the same.
Can I ask you about your experience of playing that early system and how you really like? What was the feel of it that you were like, nah, this isn't it? Like, what was its behavior that was so poor?
It wasn't the system. It wasn't bad. It was enough for us to do the thing. Like everyone in that group really like was on the same page. And so we were doing Blades in the Dark by force of will and all pointing in the same direction and like knowing what we were trying to accomplish. So I would swap out a game system and the events of the session and like the fiction would be the same.
Yeah.
So it was more like everyone got really in tune with like if the game system was doing anything, like if it was in our way or if it was helping us, because we were like, no, we weren't playing freeform. We were using the system, but we were kind of playing freeform. Like
everyone was on board. Everyone had already bought into what kind of game we wanted to be. They didn't need the game to direct them.
Yep, we could have played this with any game. We could have been playing virtually anything, except.
But you then would measure like how much was the system coming up? Did we engage the rules? Were they productive when we did?
Did it slow us down? Was it giving us results that we were like, that's not what this should be? Were we ignoring them or embracing them? Or
So like feeling for friction.
Yeah, yeah, and especially feeling for places where the system could drive, so that we weren't constantly having to invent the
work.
right thing.
Yeah, totally.
And at this point, it was like carried a lot by the general like look and feel and style of it, because there's a lot of stuff here. There's names, there's the city, there's the names of all the different like abilities.
That like the aesthetic is already defined.
It's carrying a lot
earlier. Yeah, and it's doing a lot of work for you.
Doing a whole lot of work.
Not that it's to be understated how important the aesthetics and the presentation are to get people thinking in the right way. Because if they're wrong-headed in how they're approaching the mechanics, even if the mechanics are perfectly written, they're going to end up, there's going to be friction there. If their expectations don't map accurately to what the game actually produces.
Yeah, exactly. It's and this is an ongoing thing with my designs, because I will typically try to nail down some kind of aesthetic enough to make me excited to keep working on it. And that generally, with a sympathetic group, it'll have that effect on them. They'll be like, oh yeah, we're on board with this. And so it can obfuscate sometimes a little bit what the system is really doing, because people are already kind of mostly there. They're not just like depending on the game itself to carry all of that.
Yeah, because there are those external factors too of like, what is the culture of play in your city or your specific group or whatever else, and how much of that is being written into your game, or how much of that is being passively ridden on by your game.
Yeah.
Because sometimes like I have read things where I'm like, it sounds like these things should be clear from what they've told me, but there's like this huge gap because I've never played a game with this person who wrote this. So I just can't follow, because I don't have this particular little bit of expectation or experience that I share with them.
Yeah, which is like every piece of art, right? Every piece of art
context, right?
comes from its cultural context. And we as gamers sometimes like pretend like that's not true, and anyone should be able to pick this up and play it if it's a good game. Like, well, no.
Like, you might need to do a lot of explaining, and they might still take months of practice.
And that's why those essays came into the Blades, where it's like, no, look, we need to talk about this. Like
exactly.
You need to create this stuff. I can't be there with you. You know, don't like try to throw away that expectation that a role-playing game comes with its cultural context. It does to some degree, but you really need to like bring it yourself too.
There's one specific game that has like the inverse of this problem, where it has an excess of cultural context that actually makes it harder to play the game, in my opinion, which is D&D. It just the idea of what it means to play that game vastly eclipses all of the actual facts on the ground about playing it. So to provide a counter example.
No, that's a great point. And
like, this is where we tell fantasy stories and have fun and hang out in the tavern. Like, no, it's a murder simulator. All it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all related, right? Because its usage is not necessarily the tool, you know.
Exactly.
There's like a whole thing there. We could do a whole video on that. But it's really interesting.
It's as if the whole world has been walking around with hammers, pretending they're cell phones or something.
It's just like
doing this completely different thing with this tool that wasn't made for it.
Yeah, but that cultural usage really matters.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a lot of successful like tech there that isn't always very visible if you're outside of it.
So did you playtest outside of your local group?
Yeah, I feel like it's this version. Pretty sure it's this version, when the colors come into it, where the G+ group, it was about 20 or 30 people, and like most of them were not in game groups together, so
it was a pretty big range of
dozen to 20 game groups maybe. And they were extremely good with their feedback and their like leniency with me. Like Like we all want this to exist, and we see where you're headed, so we're gonna just be really patient and try to figure this out together, and not be like, this doesn't work. You know, they were really engaged, and that is a huge reason. That plus my local group, who was very engaged. Without that, like, this would have just faded away, and you know,
Yeah, totally.
it happened because of constant weekly play, community discussion, local group discussion, hanging out, drinking beers discussion, like week after week after week after week for like 2 years, basically, just doing,
just iterating and iterating and iterating.
yeah, because we're just really excited. Like there's something here, and we need to find it. It's here. We need to keep digging. Yeah, it took a lot of digging, and without that local culture and the internet group, it wouldn't have happened.
Cool. Yeah. So you were able to get into playtest very early.
Yep.
Which I always agree is very, very important. And then also to like get a broader range, like to do both depth and breadth in your playtesting, to see if it's actually fucking working.
And it's the first time I've done that. Usually I don't do external playtests until it's much further along. But I knew, like, I already had a lot of connections, and I knew, like, oh yeah, like Matt Gagan is gonna really love this, and Michael Prescott's really gonna love this, and like I knew I could rope these people into it, and they were gonna be as excited.
Yeah, you were definitely very timely in your development and release of this game.
Yeah. So here's the guild. The guild is turning into its own booklet, and here's
actions.
Yeah, here's a fun dead end. Maybe we can do this bit, and then maybe we'll break for part 2.
Cool.
So guild actions. This is a perfectly like sensible idea, right? The characters have these things with words, and they can do stuff, and they have XP trackers. Here's the character. See, they have these things, and I think, oh well, the guild, it should have its own sheet too. So what should be on the guild sheet? Well, obviously, it should have
words,
these things, and it should do stuff. So there was a long period where downtime to some degree, although
I was going to say these look like downtime actions. A lot of them are downtime actions. A lot of them are different.
They are now, but the idea was that, and this was a bad idea for this game, but it made sense at the time, that your guild would do stuff, and so like the PCs are getting spotlighted on the jobs, and then when we're not doing a job, the guild, like the nameless guild members and the guild itself,
like step back a layer of scope and look at just the guild,
and it runs, and you like pick these guild actions to find new targets or establish a new operation, run an operation you already have established. Magic, this is the only time you could do magic in this version of the game. There was no like on-demand spellcasting. Serve jail time, again, very similar to downtime now, but you rolled the guild's stats to do that, not the characters stuff.
Guild has separate stats.
Yeah.
And do you think this is still connecting back to that idea of like relatively like fragile, disposable player characters? Or have we moved past that yet? Because I didn't see stress and resistances yet, and so I'm feeling like these characters are still relatively like suddenly gone.
Yeah, there's no stress and resistances yet. However, if you look at the harm, this really matters. The worst thing you can be on harm is broken. Dead is gone.
Okay, so you can't die now.
Yeah, I think there's a note in here about dying. Sorry, say again.
Unless the fiction demands that you die.
I think that's what, there's probably a note in here about that somewhere. But it's specifically not on here.
So we have shifted stakes away from just like abruptly your character is dead.
Yeah, there's a lot of, these characters are covering a lot of fictional territory too. Look at all the things you can be. I mean, they're all kind of different forms of scoundrel, but
like any one character can have like everyone could have magic stuff and be fighty or whatever. Like there's
this feeling like they were inseparable from the Thieves Guild, and the story was about them, and easy death and stuff just went away.
Yeah, and this is then very contrary. So we've swung back in the other direction of being a more traditional character drama with the guild as this like framing device for those characters.
Yeah, it's kind of a backdrop, and
which then makes me, and I mean obviously you moved past this, but then it's funny that that switch happened, and in that same moment you also took away a bunch of like decentered the characters in this other phase, even though they're becoming more important. Like as they are this rising star here, you have this like competing design idea, right? Like these two things clearly don't get along.
Yes, exactly. However, having just played all that Stars Without Number, it made a lot of sense to go, oh wait, we can just have faction turns.
Yes, and the crew is just another faction.
Yeah. We'll roll for their crew actions the way you roll for faction actions in Stars Without Number. That works great. That'll work.
It's a perfectly sensible and entirely unexamined import.
Yeah.
Which, like, I found that really common when I was starting to hack Blades, is I had to really ask myself, like, do I need this part of Blades that I'm bringing in? Like, do I need to include this mechanic from another game that feels like it fits but maybe doesn't? Or, like, how blind am I being to the ways in which this doesn't map to what I need it to?
Yeah. It took actual play to see it, because on paper it makes sense.
Yeah, like exactly. Like I can totally see how you came up with all of this, and that it does make a certain kind of sense.
Yeah. A lot of things make sense on paper. But
yeah, exactly. Like this isn't me telling you you're dumb. I hope I'm not coming off.
No. I wasn't. No, that's not what I meant. I meant.
How dare you, John? How dare you take this system?
No. I was saying that more to say that the scientific method is really what it's about. You know, that any of us can be Aristotle and just sit around and like think of how atoms might work. Like that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. John Harper slagging Aristotle.
Yeah, I mean he's the guy who was most wrong about everything.
But most vocal.
Yeah, all of his ideas were wrong, because he sat around and just like thought of stuff. And you got to get out there and do it and see what's really there.
Yeah, you got to have apples fall on your head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, more random tables. This is like, I like this one. Who cares if they're robbed? A minor noble, a whisper, the Lord Commissioner of the Watch.
That's bad.
That's a bad one. Yeah.
It seems like the worst result on that table is a whisper, which I love.
It is the worst, yeah.
First, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, more fortunes. The city has appeared. A lot of this is just directly in the game now, so it's not super interesting.
Yeah, like the list of tavern names and stuff. Yeah, we're starting to see some of the more kind of setting situation materials fix in, and this is by merit of you playtesting.
Yeah. Yep. And a lot of this is just like me writing down in my GM notes like the NPCs from the sessions and then collecting them all into lists.
You have chosen a theme song for your game.
Yes, the theme song is here. I was so delighted to see this when I went back and found these old documents. I was like, man, this was here for version 1.5. Nice.
And yeah, like more and more I see signs that, and you've said this yourself, right? That like the pursuit of aesthetics is what drives your design process.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, like all this business here is like, it's being held up against the aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, does this work for this? Because the aesthetic is good. We've got that.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Is this serving the aesthetic yet? And it, like I said, you can work up in a variety of ways. Every now and then I'll come at it the other way. Well, I'll be super obsessed with this certain mechanical thing and be like, okay, what's the right
dice to add up in this way, or and then it's like, what does that actually produce?
What's the right dressing to put on that?
Yeah, totally.
But that's rarer for me. Like with board gamey designs, I think that's way more like much easier to do because you swap out the fiction.
Make a system and an economy and a whatever, and then you be like, what does this look like? And then you plop that on it.
Yeah, but with a role-playing game, obviously, like the fiction comes first, and so the system has to like show up and be right for that. Well, cool.
I mean, this has been true for me, maybe in slightly a less directly like visual aesthetics way, because you're doing all this beautiful like layout and art that I don't. But that, yeah, for me, it was about having this idea of like how it should feel, and then trying to, yeah, chase that vision and cement it.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to both of our games. Like Blades is a game where you can get to places that are more meaningful and like a deeper in a human sense, but it is to a big degree like a surface type of thing. It's about visuals, it's about action, it's about all of that. Whereas Girl by Moonlight it really does matter that the like how it hits you in your
landscape of it is what I was trying to design for, and yeah,
Mhm.
that's where play is most keenly felt or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the emotional aesthetic
Yeah, yeah,
to some
like
degree.
however, granular we want to get with it. But yeah, it feels correct to me when you say it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about design, I think. I haven't really like succinctly thought of it like that before, and that feels good.
And like for me, once that vision became clear, once it clicked for me of like, oh, it has to be like this, then it was much like I made much more progress on my designs because I had something to, like you said, to hold it against,
Hmm.
to have that like context, because otherwise you really are just in this like impossibly vast creative space where you can do anything.
Yeah,
And so having a target, some star to navigate by or whatever you want to call it, like was so helpful for me, especially as like someone who was fairly new to the process.
yeah. Well, and that's another like assumption that I just don't think about unless it's called out. Like coming from like working in the creative agency type field,
Mm-hmm.
like your creative brief is your thing. You come up with your goals, your audience, the look and feel, the emotional interaction, all that stuff, and you aim for that thing. But like having a creative brief isn't what everyone else does in their jobs. So like the idea of having that isn't necessarily like the first thought.
Yeah, but for you, that's just part of your like process.
It's just, yeah.
Undertaking any work is to think of it in that way.
Yeah, you have your style board, you have your palette or whatever it is. You've got this kind of like star to steer by,
Mm-hmm.
usually
Yeah, yeah.
kind of dictated by the client to some degree, but a good agency will like provide that as opposed to just sort of taking direction. But yeah, it's
Because when I talk to like, I'm going to talk about my friend Ash again, because she's a software engineer by like training,
mm-hmm.
by vocation or whatever. And so her way of approaching is the complete opposite, where
Mm-hmm.
she makes a like numbers thing or a system and then spins that into a game. So yeah, she comes at it from that other end of things, of like mechanics, and then figuring out what aesthetics they generate and pursuing it that way. So it's like fiddle with this thing, make a little widget, and then see what the widget does, and like spin it up and run it,
Yeah,
and then follow that and make
yeah,
a game.
that's cool. That's really cool.
So yeah, I think people's backgrounds really influence how they go about solving problems. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's such a wild or enlightened statement to make, but it's cool to see that stuff in action. Like going through this with you, it's like abundantly clear to me a little bit of like, how does John's brain work, and how to nibble at these problems and find solutions.
Yeah. Good. Cool. That's we like had a little epiphany there. That was nice. I'm gonna stop here. We'll do a little part 2 after this. There's a few more versions to maybe talk about, and so tune in for that. We'll be back. We're not gonna be back. We're not streaming. This is recorded. I'm so used to being live. We'll be back in 5. No. Click on the next video in the playlist.
You'll be able to see this immediately. You've already skipped this rambling ending.
Yeah. All right.